And I think the difficult thing for most of us is the process of leading up to dying can be very difficult unless it happens suddenly. But the actual dying itself is just so easy. You just leave that body. So then I have them look back at the body to be sure that they really have finished that lifetime. And then right then and there, as a spirit having just finished that lifetime, that is the key here to getting help. And so I ask the person, what are you aware of right now? You've just finished that life. What are you aware of that you are deciding, concluding, maybe even making a vow about, that, or whatever it is that you're carrying over from that lifetime, which is carried over into your lifetime now. And I always mention the person's name now, to help them get back into this lifetime. And it's just astonishing and wonderful to me how they are very clear in that state of being. They're not in the physical body, you see, at that point. They're very, very clear about what they've brought over that's been affecting them in this lifetime.
That is remarkable work.
Yes, and then the even more important part comes from my point of view as a therapist, and that is that I ask if they would like to release themselves from that unfortunate thing that's been carried over. So it might be a chronic illness sort of pattern, or it might be the pain in the neck, literally, that I mentioned, or it might be a certain belief that's running their life, such as, oh, I can never trust people, or I will never love again, or I am totally worthless, I am unlovable, or whatever those sort of beliefs are that might be sort of running that person's life in a subtle way, but a very important way. And so if they would like to release whatever that is that they've negatively carried over into this life, then I do a healing, clearing, releasing process. I just sort of guide them through that. And it involves visualization to some extent and kinesthetic feelings of letting go, being sort of cleansed and purified, letting go of whatever that was, and then standing firm, free of that, and vowing now to come back into this life at the current time, free of that problem. And the wonderful thing is that it really makes a huge difference.
I would imagine it does. And what's also so interesting as you're talking about this is that in order to do that with them after they've passed away in that last lifetime, that means that consciousness exists outside the body.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is profound.
It is.
Absolutely profound.
It is. And you see, when I started all this work back in the 1970s, I had no concept whatsoever about past lives. Like all of us, we'd heard that in certain parts of the world, especially in the Far East and India and so forth, that people do believe in reincarnation. And I'd always thought, oh, that's kind of quaint. Okay, well, if that's what they believe, that's okay. But I didn't believe it. And what got me into this, seemingly by happenstance, but I see that it was really more than that. I think my soul was really kicking in and guiding me here. But in 1981, I started doing quite a bit of traveling. And I went to Peru. And while I was up at Machu Picchu, 2 times there, I suddenly had a big memory come up, just walking across the field there way up high at Machu Picchu. I had this strong memory and a very strong sense that I was a little girl, a very dark skin, dark black hair, different features to some extent, In other words, very different than I as a woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, very light skin. But here I was, this dark-skinned, little black-haired girl, and very sturdy, and walking along barefoot, and into an area of stones, and followed almost like a little roadway around to the left, and then to the right, and to the left, and into the door of my stone house. Now, those stone places really were there, but it was like I was remembering being a little girl and going into my house there. And I thought, well, how could that be? It was so realistic. And then the next day up there, I had a very traumatic thing trying to climb the extra mountain called Huayna Picchu, a big cone-shaped mountain that projects up from Machu Picchu. And I had climbed plenty of mountains very safely and with confidence and enjoyment in this life. But at a certain point, at the edge of that steep mountain, I absolutely froze. I was frozen with terror, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't move, and I was disgusted with myself, and I thought, I want to get to the top of this mountain. My friends were doing it. I would have always done it, but something's awful right now. I'm just paralyzed with terror. Well, eventually I realized that came from what must have been a previous lifetime when I was a young, dark-skinned, black-haired man in a loincloth and little sandals running up that mountain, being chased by another young man, dark-skinned, black-haired, loincloth, but of a different tribe, apparently. And he had a knife. And when I got to that particular point on that mountain, he lunged at me with the knife. And to avoid the knife stabbing me, I kind of leaned over backwards, fell off the mountain, fell down a whole mile to these great boulders by the Urubamba River, and of course died. Well, see, I didn't know about that. But there I was on this mountain in this life in 1981, and all of that memory came up just seemingly out of nowhere. But it was so real, so dramatic, and so bodily effective in terms of being frozen with terror that I really began to think, this has got to be real. And then I began to think, I'm already a licensed therapist. Maybe there's a way that if people can access difficult things that are affecting them now from a previous lifetime, maybe there's a way to use this therapeutically. And then I discovered Helen Wambaugh's work about a year later. And a year after that, I met the founder of the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies and went to their conference and started taking their training and began using the regression work in my therapy practice, along with many other forms of therapy I do. And then the extraterrestrial people started coming in 1991, and so the rest has all unfolded from all of that.
This also explains probably why people have this feeling that they're not living in the right place, that they're not situated geographically in the right place. Like, I've always had this longing to be in Europe, and I really don't want to be living in the United States.
Yes.
And I don't know why. And the United States is beautiful, but I have this longing to be in Europe, and I keep saying to everybody, I've got to go home.
Yeah.
And I have this thing with England and France, and it just won't leave me alone. It's probably from another time and place, or I have a divine commitment there.
Well, chances are extremely likely that you have lived in Europe many, many lifetimes, and it does feel more at home for you. Back in 1973, and I didn't know for years how to assimilate this or how to explain it to myself. But in 1973, so that's way before I ever thought about past lives, I was flying in an airplane from Los Angeles, up across near the North Pole, and then land, to go to London. And it was early morning when we were flying over